Diablo 4. I know a lot of people have been excited about this game, and I was too. After playing it for a little while, here is my honest take on the game so far. The Battle.net launcher doesn't really give players any way to track how many hours they've spent playing a game, unlike Steam, so I can't really tell you how much of this I've played. It feels like I'm sitting at about 30 hours, but again, I can't confirm. Anyway, I beat the main campaign for Diablo 4 and then spent another few days playing the game in Nightmare mode, and after 100%ing a couple of the regions, I think I've come to a decent understanding of the game as a whole, and more importantly, what it's missing. Full disclosure, I've only actually ever played a Necromancer, both during the betas and on full release, because there's no heavily armored class like a Paladin or a Crusader. That is actually a good talking point that I'm not really going to talk about because there's so much else that I'm disappointed with in Diablo 4, but it is worth mentioning that Blizzard somehow left out one of the most iconic classes in the entire fucking franchise. Hell, we didn't even have a Paladin class until the DLC in Diablo 3. I don't know why Blizzard thinks that its players don't want to play as a Paladin. Paladins are one of the most common classes in World of Warcraft. But whatever, I digress. Also, full disclosure, this video is going to be a lot of me shitting on Diablo 4. If you had fun playing this game, good for you. I had fun playing this game sometimes. It's not a bad game by any stretch of the imagination. My videos just tend to focus on the negative instead of the positive. Without further ado, let's get started. Let's start with the story, which is okay, I guess. I skipped all the cutscenes during the beta, that way I could experience the story in its entirety when the game hit full release, and I gotta say, it's kinda hit or miss. I'm gonna put a spoiler alert on the screen so that you can just skip past this section if you don't want to be spoiled for anything related to the story. When the alert goes away, you're safe to continue the video. The main problem with the story is that Lilith isn't this unfathomable demon like Mephisto or Belial or Diablo were in the previous titles. Lilith is a character that you intimately follow and speak with for most of the main story, getting to know her thoughts and feelings and motivations. Here's why this doesn't fucking work. Diablo fans don't want a sympathetic villain in the same way that Doom fans don't want the same. ARPGs attract mindless killing, so why are you trying to spin this empathetic tale of Lilith wanting to make sure that Sanctuary is free of all angels and demons? Why are you trying to make the protagonist walk this ethical and moral tightrope, choosing between the lesser of two evils, Mephisto and Lilith? And then you have the gall to not even give the protagonist any choice in the fucking matter. The player character just allows this random fucking girl to make the choice for Sanctuary. Who the fuck is this bitch? As far as I can tell, Nilruin has been a whiny little shit the entire story, and has zero reason to have an ounce of say what the Black Soulstone gets used for in the end. The entire storyline as a whole feels incredibly lazy as far as writing is concerned, and worst of all, the story ends on a goddamn cliffhanger. This stupid bitch uses the Soulstone on Mephisto and then just leaves you to fight Lilith in the final chapter, and then she has the audacity to fucking ghost you. She just leaves you in Lorath with a note that says, I had the Soulstone, I need to go on a spirit quest, don't come look for me. It's like the worst character qualities I've ever seen, and the game has the balls to try to justify her actions. I would, and I am not joking about this, I would pay $100 for the next DLC that comes to Diablo 4 if it's just a final story act of the player hunting Nilruin down, ripping the Soulstone out of her grimy little hands, and then curb stomping her so hard that Mephisto starts howling in laughter. I would sincerely pay $100 for that DLC, and I guarantee a lot of Diablo 4 players would absolutely do the same. Also, Diablo, the Lord of Terror, doesn't even make an appearance in this game. If I'm not mistaken, this is the first Diablo game to not have him as a villain for the character to fight. He was always a central antagonist in the previous titles, but not in this game. Needless to say, the story isn't that great. But story isn't what draws in Diablo fans, is it? Killing demons and grinding for better loot is what made the franchise what it is today. So how does the game do in that respect? For the most part, good. It feels good to play this game. For a while. It has its ups and downs, definitely more ups than downs compared to Diablo 3, which is a sign that Blizzard might possibly be capable of turning this sinking ship of a company around. Let's start with the good stuff. The new dodge mechanic.
Just remember the 5 Ds of dodgeball. Dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge.
The addition of a dodge system added some much needed fluidity to the game, and honestly I think a lot more ARPGs in the future are going to be taking this mechanic and translating it into their own game, which I am all for. I hate ARPGs that require quick movement to avoid mechanics, but also offer no easy ways to get that movement. Path of Exile, I'm looking at you. and honestly, it works pretty well in Diablo 4. I thought the dodge would give you invincibility frames like in Dark Souls, but it obviously doesn't, and on some level I do understand why. The dodge function isn't really used for the player to become invincible for a brief second, it's designed to get the fuck out of an area before you get killed by an AoE attack, and for that, it is designed very, very well. Codexes of Power.
The Codex Astartes does not support this action. Spacebook says this bad.
These are bonuses that you can attach to rare gear after you earn them, usually from dungeons scattered around the world. They sort of feel like a watered-down form of Kanai's Cube from Diablo 3, and I really would like to see more variety in these, but it is convenient to be able to turn rares into legendaries with guaranteed effects so that you can remain consistent with your gear as you level up and get stronger. It does need some work, but it's a good system for the most part. Uniques. Previous Diablo titles didn't have gear that altered your class abilities and skills in drastic ways, but Diablo 4 added a new tier of items called Uniques. These are items that apply powerful effects to your skills and completely altering the way that you use a build. For instance, Bone Spear now explodes as it travels, dealing heavy damage in an AoE. You've now turned a skill with a very narrow area of damage into a pack-clearing tool. Corpse Explosion now no longer just detonates the corpse, it now raises a volatile skeleton that will home in on enemies and then explode. Shit like that. This is where the real gear is, and it's incredibly satisfying whenever one of these drops. I was running a shadow-based build with minions, and then this helmet dropped. I literally went back to town and revamped my build using Bone Spear, and started obliterating entire packs of enemies. Again, I'd like more variety in the gear, since each class really only has a few of them to choose from, and adding more over time would add more build diversity, which is really just a good thing to have in an ARPG. Now we're on to the things that I disliked. Now, that list of things I liked might seem small, and it is. I don't really have a bright side to tack on here, but the list of things that I don't like is going to seem slightly lengthy in comparison. Monster Hordes. You know what everyone loved about previous Diablo games? Elite enemies with a teleporter modifier teleporting on top of you and then instantly killing you, especially if you're a hardcore character. You know what this game has? Entire packs of enemies that can spawn on top of you, instantly killing you. You know, I have no idea what causes these. It seems like it happens sometimes when you engage in an elite pack, but it's not consistent and it's also a bad mechanic. It's bad enough that you have elite mobs that can teleport directly on top of you, but now you have randomly spawning packs that can do the exact same thing with zero warning whatsoever. Who the fuck thought that was a good idea? Inventory management. The inventory feels small. I don't know why, but it somehow feels smaller than in D3. D2's inventory is arguably one of the worst features of that game because it was incredibly dated, but D3 seemed to handle it alright because you could upgrade your inventory to a reasonable size, and you stopped feeling like you were full all the time. Diablo 4 brought back all the hassle of Diablo 2's inventory without any of the quality of life changes in Diablo 3. I don't know which of you neckbeards convinced Blizzard that managing an inventory is somehow fun, but you need to knock it the fuck off because it's not. There are plenty of cool ways to handle this. I don't much like the Torchlight games, but in those games, you have a pet/familiar thing that can carry items for you, and even take those items back to town to sell them for you, removing the hassle of you having to do it yourself, so you can keep on fighting and grinding. It's a good solution to arguably the worst feature of ARPGs, managing loot. Diablo 4 really needs some kind of inventory expansion or other system to allow players to dismantle stuff out in the field or something, because right now inventory is just an annoying thing to have to deal with. Server issues. Blizzard offered a copy of the game that gave the consumer access to the game almost a week early for 50% more cost. Great! My friend bought that version for me so that we could play together. Come to play, we were met with server issues constantly. I think the login services went down at least twice in the 6 days before full launch, not to even mention that the game has gone down even more after full launch. I believe I've counted at least 5 different instances where the login servers have straight up did not work for at least an hour at a time. Blizzard's Twitter feed tells you a pretty dumb story. And you know what the worst part is? This game is permanently online. You cannot play this game offline. So if the servers go down, you can't play the game, period. I don't know how Blizzard can expect a massive influx of players on the opening week and not prepare their servers properly, especially when you remember that Diablo 4 had multiple beta weekends and server slams. And before anyone goes down in the comment section and says some bullshit like, well, Diablo 3 was online and people still played that, or Diablo 4 has other more important issues to address, let me just go ahead and give you this.
I've got a peer-reviewed study right here that says... says you're a pussy.
Even if you excuse the login issues, when the servers do work, you'll sometimes get such intense lag spikes that you can barely fucking play the game properly. And good luck if you're on a hardcore character and die to lag. On a similar note, the game seems to like chunk sometimes. I keep a task manager open in my second monitor permanently so that I can monitor my resource usage, and Diablo 4 is nowhere at maximum resources, yet the game sometimes chugs my machine. This primarily happens whenever I enter a town, i.e. whenever I walk into town or whenever I use a town portal. I sometimes tab out to do something on my other monitor, and my entire PC grinds to a halt while Diablo 4 loads up the town. I don't know what's causing this, if other players being integrated into my instance does it, or if towns are just somehow really intensive. But it needs to be fixed and optimized ASAP. Mounts. I don't like them. You get them way too late in the campaign in my opinion, and when you do finally get them, it doesn't feel awfully rewarding. When you hop off your mount, you have a pretty long cooldown before you can hop back on them. This doesn't feel too annoying until you start having to hop off them to climb up cliffs and over other obstacles. I think you have to wait another 8 seconds before your mount is available again. Also, the mount does not control very well. It gets stuck on random shit constantly, and a lot of its speed mechanics just don't make any sense. The horse doesn't accelerate like a horse would. It seems to instantly gain boosts of speed when the boost wears off, the horse instantly falls back down to a lower speed. There's no deceleration. It feels incredibly clunky and doesn't feel smooth at all. In addition, sometimes the boost just doesn't work. You'll hit the spacebar to give your horse a kick, and the horse just doesn't fucking do anything. It refuses to move faster. And those spur charges have a 10-second CD, which is also too long in my opinion. In conclusion, the mount just doesn't feel correct, and is not implemented very well. Enemy AoEs. The AoEs in this game are way too large for the areas that you encounter them in, to the point where, like, I've been fighting enemies in tight corridors, and I get blasted with an AoE, and just instantly die, and it doesn't feel fair. I didn't think to myself, oh, I fucked up, that was my fault, alright game. It was more like, wow, this game isn't balanced very well, and I shouldn't have died there. It's pretty bad. There were multiple points where I was forced onto some tiny platform, and the game just peppers 1,000 different AoE effects at me, and I didn't feel like I was fighting, I felt like I was just dodging. The game with those points wasn't an ARPG, it was a bullet hell. And that's fine if you're into that sort of thing, I have no problem with bullet hells. But when combat in Diablo 4 is only a challenge because you're forced to dodge AoEs or die, it's not fun to play. It's just annoying, especially when you start to enter higher difficulties. Skill variety. There isn't enough of it. I don't know how other classes feel, but Necromancer doesn't feel done. You have access to like 3 skills in each skill type, Bone, Blood, and Shadow. That isn't nearly enough, especially when you lock passives into certain damage types. You want to use the Shadow Blight key passive? Well, your options are either DOT or in melee range scythe skills. Good luck. Bone skills? You got a lance, and that's pretty much it. Have fun. I don't know how this game was ever intended to be played for hundreds if not thousands of hours with this level of skill variety. It's insulting. Speaking of skills, at least for the Necromancer, the ultimate skills are kind of bad. I don't know why they have a 90-second CD, but it's far too long, and for what they actually accomplish in combat, they need to have their CD reduced. Multiplayer scaling. Bosses seem to scale way too much with multiple players in the party, to the extent where my group of 3 was spending 10 minutes or more on a single boss. Absolutely fucking ridiculous. It needs to be toned down. Durability on items. Why does it exist? Are you trying to punish players for dying? Great, make them lose XP like in Path of Exile, or better yet, make them lose gold like you did in the fucking alpha version of the game. Why put this unnecessary blockade in the way of the player? They already died, stop spitting in the wound. Also, the cost for repairs is too damn high. My character at this stage had about 1 million gold, give or take, and I died 3 times in a stronghold. When I went to repair, it cost me almost 70,000 gold. That's almost 10% of my goddamn wallet. Why the fuck is it so high? What are these blacksmiths charging? Why can't I be a blacksmith? It seems a lot more profitable than killing demons all day. The Paragon board system. Arguably the worst sore spot for a lot of people right now, because it isn't what we were promised. During development, we were shown this massive Path of Exile style screen with hundreds of options, and hundreds of different ways to invest skill points and really flesh out a build to make it unique. And what we got is this. It's boring, it's bland, it's insulting. It doesn't feel like I'm getting stronger because the bonuses are so tiny and negligible that the only ones worth getting are the legendary nodes and maybe some of the glyph sockets. I was holding out hope that the passive skill tree system was like 10% of the build customization potential, and when I finally got to level 50 and started using the Paragon board system, I was incredibly disappointed. Regeneration. Why is it so rare? Why is there no in-combat regen? Why are we relying on our potions for healing inside of battle? In fact, I haven't seen lifesteal in any of my gear, only life on kill, which means that you can only get that passive healing from killing enemies, not just damaging them. It feels incredibly clunky to be mashing the potion hotkey in combat repeatedly, instead of just fucking giving us some natural healing. This is honestly a terrible design choice for a lot of reasons, and I have zero idea how it would ever made it out of QA. Even Diablo 2 had flat regen attached to items, and I don't know why Diablo 4 missed adding that in. Aggro. No, not the horse from Shadow of the Colossus. Aggro as in how angry an enemy is with you and how willing they are to ignore all other enemies to focus you down. It's a core concept in tanking, which is the ability to piss off enemies and eat hits for your allies, that way they can all stay alive to heal you or deal damage. It's prevalent in most MMORPGs, but it also reaches into other games like ARPGs whenever minions are involved. Minions in most ARPGs have a high aggro value, which means that enemies typically ignore the summoner in favor of attacking their minions instead. This makes summoners a very defensive class because they always have a horde of meat shields in between them and the enemy, so all they really have to do is worry about summoning minions that fall in battle and avoiding AoE attacks. However, for some reason, Diablo 4 doesn't really do aggro mechanics. There is a taunt in the Necromancer's kit for their golem, one of their golems, but for the most part, enemies will actively ignore your minions and target you. This is actually a problem for a lot of reasons because it detracts from how minion-oriented necromancers can work. D2 Minionmancers were a safe class to play. D3 Minionmancers were a safe class to play. D4 doesn't play by those rules anymore. It's arguably the worst thing about this game right now. I don't spend my time in combat micromanaging my minions because I have to worry about trash mobs peeling off from the mosh pit and attacking me. Most of my time in combat is spent kiting enemies around while casting spells every so often because my minions can't hold aggro. It's bad. It needs to be fixed, Blizzard. This is the one thing making minions not viable and not fun to play. It's absurd. I have no idea how any of this ever passed QA testing, because any Necromancer players would have told you that this system was a bad idea within minutes of playing around with a minion build. Now, the next section is just going to talk about Necromancer specifically because that's all I played, so if you don't care about how bad the class is right now, you can skip ahead or something. Minions in general just aren't that good. Because of the lack of aggro mechanics, they don't do much to shield you from harm, they can't proc any on-kill effects, so using sides is kind of pointless if you're trying to use them for their life on kill implicit. They're far too squishy even when you invest heavily into their passive nodes for extra life, and there's no good way to increase the number of minions you have. You have access to a couple legendary affixes that don't stack, and that's it. In Diablo 2, Summon Mancer was scary because they were so safe. It was a reliable build that felt good to use because all your minions mattered, and if one died you were incentivized to immediately resummon them. Best of all, they almost never died outside of like uber fights or really difficult elite mobs, because investing into them was worth it. In Diablo 4, you're far better off just sacrificing all your minions in the Book of the Dead and just running a blood or bone build. You may be thinking to yourself, well surely minions must do a lot of damage then, right? Yeah, no. If you didn't cast any spells and you just watched your minions whittle down an enemy's health, it would take 10 times longer than you just doing it yourself. So no, they don't deal much damage either. Keep in mind, I've heavily invested into them. Any passive skill node that buffs minion life or damage, I invested into it. I maxed out those nodes. And minions still feel this awful even after all that investment. Minions don't feel like they have a place in the game because they're awful. They don't do a lot of damage and they can't really take a hit either. So what's the point in using them? Corpses. It feels like I'm either using them too much or not enough. You know why? Because there are two skills in the Necro's kit that use them. Corpse Explosion and your Summon Skeleton skill. That's it. There's no D3 Devour skills to eat corpses to regain essence, no Corpse Lance or Revive either. You can either blow up a corpse or you can use it for your skeletons. Speaking of, if you use your skeleton skill while you're at maximum skeletons, you instead summon this ephemeral priest that buffs your minions for a short time and heals them. Here's the problem, the healing is terrible because it's 10% of their max life, and it's not instant, it's over time. You need to invest passive points later to make this thing even useful, but the real problem is that the healing is still not instant. So you can't just spam this skill to keep your skeletons alive. It doesn't stack, and it's honestly a bad way to use corpses. It needs to be reworked, and we need more corpse skills. At least give us a fucking unique item that automatically eats nearby corpses to regain essence or something. Corpses are a main feature of the Necromancer class, and they're designed incorrectly. Give us more options for utilizing them. Shadow skills look like runny diarrhea, and I hate it because they are the best skills to use in a minion build. The corpse explosion modifier to make the explosion turn into a puddle on the ground is incredibly intrusive, and I can barely see my fucking screen when I use it, and I know for a fact that other players can see these puddles because my friends were complaining about them, and I've seen them in real time. Blizzard, you need to make shadow skills a purple fog or something. They need a visual rework. It looks like the Necromancer is slinging around raw sewage, and it's pretty fucking gross. Skill slots. I don't know how other classes feel, but Necromancer suffers from the lack of skill slots available to them. This might seem weird, but for those of you who haven't played Necro, let me explain. Your Summon Skeletons button and the Golem button each have their own skill slots. So if you don't sacrifice your minions using the Book of the Dead, you have to use 2 of your precious 4 skill slots on your bar to use your minions correctly. And when you're playing a Necromancer, you always have a lot of options. Corpse Explosion, both the curse abilities, Blood Mist, Bone Prison. I always felt like I wanted to have more slots available to my character. I barely use curses because I need those 2 precious slots for other things. Blizzard really should have found a way to make minions not use your valuable skill slots. Do you know why I'm giving Blizzard such a hard time with the Necromancer class? I'm going to go on a very brief tangent about minions for a quick second. Blizzard, do you know what the minion class fantasy is? Because it's not this. A minion class should be safe in the back lines with lower damage than other classes to compensate for its ease of play. I'm fine going slow through a dungeon if it means that I'm not dying every 10 seconds in this game. That's why I play summoners. If I wanted to play on the front line, that's where I'd be. So why do you insist on letting enemies ignore aggro? Why do you insist on letting minions be so squishy? Also, motherfucker, you invented the class fantasy in Diablo 2. You set the goddamn standard here, so why did you suddenly forget who the fuck you were? It doesn't make any sense. Diablo 2 has longevity because of the rune word system, some of which are so rare that players still haven't seen any of those runes drop yet. Path of Exile has longevity because it's so complicated and has so many interactions between the skill system and unique items that you can come up with 100 different ways to play a simple archetype like a minion build. I can't think of a single reason to play Diablo 4 long term. Once you 100% each region map, all you're doing is grinding tiny bonuses on your Paragon board. That's it. There is nothing to work for, nothing that feels rewarding anyway. It feels like I'm complaining too much about Diablo 4, and that might not be fair. I'm having fun, sometimes. But the game doesn't feel done. It doesn't feel like there's much to look forward to long term. It feels like people are going to play this game for a month or two and then go back to whatever they were playing before. That's not how an ARPG is supposed to feel. That's not how a Diablo game is supposed to feel. This game is not going to have the longevity that Diablo 2 has. Hell, it might not even have the longevity that Diablo 3 had, and most fans hated Diablo 3. All in all, do I recommend the game? Yes, to some extent. If you like ARPGs, you should give Diablo 4 a try. It's good enough that I think most people will have a good time with it, but the game in its current state just isn't polished enough to attract players in the long term. After you play it for a little while, you're probably going to get bored and move on to something else. I really hope that Blizzard proves me wrong, and refines the game into a much better state. But with how rough things are going at Blizzard these days, I don't have high expectations of that ever happening. Well, thanks everyone for watching the video. I apologize if it came off on a very negative term, but thanks anyway for watching. I hope you guys have a nice day.